away from hope and change to hope and obstruction of justice, but here we are. Democrats today accusing the White House of obstruction for blocking former Trump aide Hope Hicks from answering questions before the House Judiciary Committee about her time in the White House. And if her interactions with our reporters today were any indication, Hicks towed that White House line.
Hope, did the president obstruct justice? Is the White House letting you answer any questions today?
Have you spoken to the president at all about this testimony?
Why is the White House limiting your testimony so much?
Colleague Casey Hunt even more now. A Justice Department lawyer claiming Hicks has immunity from answering questions since she used to be a member of the executive branch, an argument Democrats say is bogus.
I'm watching obstruction of justice in action. You have the White House asserting absolute immunity, which is not a thing. It doesn't exist. And you have to ask the question, what are they trying to hide from American people?
All this does is it just takes us to the court, it wastes the taxpayers' dollars, and you'll just see the president say, well, this is taking too long. And the reason it's taking too long is because it's a team of obstructors.
The president is continuing to engage in a cover-up to try to prevent Congress from finding the facts.
Now, there's no question that Democrats will continue to push for answers from Hicks on her time in the White House. She is one of Robert Mueller's key obstruction witnesses. Her testimony cited more than 73 times in the actual Mueller report, including about Trump's reaction to the appointment of Mueller as special counsel. From that report, quote, when Sessions told the president that a special counsel had been appointed, the president slumped back in his chair and said, "Oh, my God. This is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed." The president then told Sessions he should resign as Attorney General. Sessions agreed to submit his resignation and left the Oval Office. Hicks saw the president shortly after Sessions departed and described the president as being extremely upset by the special counsel's appointment. Hicks said that she had only seen the president like that one other time, when the Access Hollywood tape came out during the campaign. And as patience with Hicks runs thin, so does patience with special counsel Robert Mueller and his reluctance to appear on Capitol Hill.
In terms of Bob Mueller, he's going to have to testify. And he can testify voluntarily or he can testify under subpoena, but it's going to happen. I don't think a 2-year investigation of this magnitude, followed by a written report and a 10-minute statement without questions, satisfactorily answers the many, many questions that we have about the investigation. So I also think time and patience are running out on that front.
Mueller's elusiveness triggering our friend Joe Scarborough this morning in his questioning of House Intel Committee member Jim Himes.
Millions and millions of dollars were paid for your report. Not everybody, Bob, is going to read it. So you read it for them. Like, this is seriously? I tell you what, as you can tell, I'm a little... This is outrageous that this guy has not been dragged to Capitol Hill to talk. That's all I got to say.
Joe, I have 2 things to say. Number one, it's going to happen. He's going to get subpoenaed. Look, we have a profound interest inside the Intelligence Committee in hearing about something that we haven't heard nearly enough. And by the way, it'll be behind closed doors, so it's not necessarily going to be newsworthy.
Why?
But we must hear about the...
Why is it going to be behind closed doors?
Because what we need to hear about in the Intelligence Committee is the counterintelligence investigation.
Okay, so
that's totally separate.
So what's
the other thing, which is what you're talking about so animatedly, is getting Bob Mueller, because for all the reasons you state, getting Bob Mueller simply to say what he said in the report, which, by the way, he said he would do. He said, my testimony is in that report. But as you point out, an awful lot of people haven't gotten through the near 500 pages. And so there is virtue in that.
It's time for all of us to speak animatedly. That is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us on set, former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella, and Associated Press White House reporter Jonathan Lemire. Also joining us, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, plus Frank Figliuzzi, a former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI. Frank Figliuzzi, tell me why Joe Scarborough's wrong. I don't think he is. I think he's absolutely right. Democrats have lost any momentum they had coming out of what was a concerted 5-act play to cover up the actual results of the Mueller report by Attorney General William Barr. They've now lost all the steam from that revelation, any momentum they had, and the White House seems to be getting its way, as evidenced by Hope Hicks not even answering questions, walking the halls of Capitol Hill. It's ludicrous.
Yeah, the gentlemanly civility of Robert Mueller and his adherence to decorum and protocol and apolitical appearance hasn't served us well. It worked well a few years back, but we're in a society that watches TV, gets our news from whatever particular network we watch or from our neighbors or colleagues, and we need to see something play out in front of us. It's sad, but it's true, and I think Bob Mueller absolutely does need to testify. It's time, it's past time for him to talk about his report to all of the American public, and as much of that testimony needs to be in open hearings, not behind closed doors.
Joyce Vance, Robert Mueller found that Donald Trump committed crimes, that he committed 10 acts of obstruction of justice. Robert Mueller also found that Russia attacked our democracy to help Donald Trump. These are two really simple truths. These are two, Elizabeth Warren was able to boil them down into a sentence. Why can't Democrats?
That's really been a challenge for Democrats. They've never been as effective with the pen as President Trump is on Twitter. Maybe they should try limiting the number of characters and doing it that way. But the reality is, when you're talking about complex issues, and these are, for instance, I would maybe take issue with the notion that Mueller found 10 instances of obstruction. I think he definitely had evidence to support moving forward on 4. And so you can see how just doing the top line explanation there, it takes time. Being sensible, having good policy, understanding the law, it takes time. So the real challenge for Democrats is getting the attention of the country and something more substantive than a tweet.
I'm going to say something that is going to keep me off Twitter for a week. When Democrats lose elections, this is why. What Joyce just said, I'm sure is accurate. He didn't find 10, but the opposite of I can't say crimes weren't committed is to a political communicator, crimes were committed. And if Democrats don't have the you-know-whats to assert that and let the president's lawyers go out and say, well, no, we didn't. He found 10 instances where the nexus between an occurrence and a proceeding were not exactly met. But let Trump explain that a crime wasn't committed in the obstruction section.
Well, and the idea that Mueller doesn't believe he has a responsibility to communicate further about this report. He knows what Barr did. This is not a dumb man. He knows that Barr totally screwed him in terms of the way he put the report out there before Mueller had a chance to have his summary or to have his conclusions presented in a fair way. So here's the deal. You've got to come. And here's my thing to the House Judiciary Committee. Don't even talk to me about impeachment if you can't manage to get Mueller in front of your committee. Jerry Nadler needs to quit doing press conferences on the need for impeachment and start explaining to the American people why a subpoena wasn't issued the next day.
Well, that's such a good point. Have you called him and told him that?
No, I haven't.
Can we call him?
Yeah, let's get him on the phone.
Why? It is a perfect setup, Heidi. Why are we debating impeachment when we can't even get Robert Mueller to Capitol Hill?
That was the very first question after a report came out, which was, okay, now when are you going to come and sit in the chair and tell us about it? Even from Jerry Nadler's perspective, that was what he told us would happen. And it is beyond me as a reporter, because I'm plugged into all of the sources up there who you need to be talking to on this, as to why there is such a long lag on this, other than there's only one explanation, which is that the leadership has made the calculation that the numbers are not there, even though they could eventually move. They don't want to have this show right now. They want to push it off as far as possible because they don't want to actually do impeachment. They don't want to do it.
But I guess, Jonathan Lemire, the point to all of this is that Hope Hicks strolling around the Capitol saying nothing to Casey Hunt is as perfect a symbol of this moment as anything. Hope Hicks, who's quoted in the Mueller report close to 100 times, who witnessed all the scrutiny, all of the conduct that's under scrutiny, not just the president's reaction saying I'm effed when Mueller was appointed, but also the incidents that I understand he's the most concerned about, getting Sessions to unrecuse, all of the conflict and internal strife with Don McGahn, who was the one asked to carry out a lot of the president's code reds, if you will. Why is she up there saying nothing?
Hope Hicks today in her testimony wouldn't talk at all about her time in the White House. She wouldn't even confirm where her desk was in the West Wing.
Why not?
That she said that's part of the privilege. She doesn't have to speak about it. She wouldn't confirm where she sat. But to me, that's emblematic of the approach this White House has taken. They're not going to cooperate. They're going to stonewall. They're not going to say anything, or if they do, it's the bare minimum like we saw from her today. And of course, she said nothing to Casey Hunt there in the hallways. This is what they're going to do. And the president, of course, back to the Mueller part, we've been saying this all along. We've reported it. We know how anxious he is about the idea of Mueller appearing in public. That even if he doesn't go much beyond his reading from the report, they know the image, the weight that his words would carry. That this is someone who the American public has heard from exactly once in 2+ years since he got the job, and that was a riveting display. That news conference he held. Imagine it that much more for if he sat there for a few hours in the Capitol Hill, in Congress, talking about what he found, and perhaps go even choosing maybe he would go a little further to rebut what William Barr and others have said.
Well, and you don't need Mueller to do all the work. The truth is, I know Trump calls them 17 angry Democrats. They were actually close to 24 skilled career prosecutors who could sit on sit next to him. And if there were different individuals and different investigators who questioned Hope Hicks or Don McGahn, I don't think Mueller questioned either of them. You could deputize others to tell this story.
And there's a big constitutional question here that's going to get to the forefront. Clearly, the White House believes they have a Supreme Court that is going to go places no one anticipates with executive privilege.
Yes.
Now, they're not saying it's executive privilege, and Joyce, please correct me here if I get any of the legal stuff wrong, but they're not saying privilege because she's already testified. She's talked about this to someone else. So they're trying to say this is some kind of immunity she has from talking. This is open question of law. And my question to my former colleagues in Congress, Republicans and Democrats, really? You're going to let the executive branch go this far? You're going to say, we're going to lay down and let the executive branch say, we get to decide who can tell you anything about what we're doing on the public's behalf.
And that's just it. They're undermining the Congress's very role. It's not just a political calculation in the short term about this president.
Trump, they are absolutely screwing the congressional branch of power for maybe a long, long time. And that's why my Republican friends need to wake up and smell the coffee here, because this door is going to swing both ways.
Can I just say one thing in their defense, though? Because if you listen to the Democrats today, like David Cicilline, like Eric Swalwell, they say, that's it. We're going to court. We passed this resolution previously to give us the power to go to court and enforce these subpoenas, so here we come. The problem is, even if they use every lever of power that they have available to them right now, the mission of slow walking this is achieved by the Republicans.
Let me just press you on this idea, Claire, because it seems as though, Nancy Pelosi's last pronouncement about Trump was, I'm not even going to answer him. Well, it's interesting and ironic that she won't even answer him when he is taking her lunch. He is schooling her. He's stripping her of her authority. He's stripping her of her power. And he now has her 24/7 whipping the impeachment count and monitoring the tracking polls like he monitors his TV ratings. I mean, he's beating Pelosi on the impeachment question.
On the question of who has more power in our checks and balances system. This is unprecedented what this president is doing. This is a guy who campaigned and said no more executive orders. Executive orders are terrible. I used to listen to all my colleagues on the right in the Senate go on and on about Obama using executive power. Holy cow. He was like a piker in executive power compared to what this White House is trying to do. Not even letting somebody testify where their desk was.
I totally agree with you, but I guess my question is why? Is he in their head? Why? I understand why the Republicans do it. They're too wimpy to sustain and survive a mean tweet. Why do the Democrats do it?
Well, I think the Democrats are trying. It's just you've got one of the things that Nancy Pelosi has to do is herd cats. You've got a lot of committees. There's a lot of jurisdictional issues in those committees. It's bizarre and it's not effective, but I saw it in the Senate. You know, one chairman would get all up in arms because another chairman was talking about things. I mean, if you look at immigration, I think there's 4 committees in the Senate that have jurisdiction over immigration. No wonder we can't fix immigration.
It's like high school.
We can't decide who's in charge.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the problem. But I think she's got to realize that she's got to get more focused on the issue of getting the facts in front of the American people, first with Mueller, and then as quickly as possible, getting them to court. And by the way, I'm not sure it works to their benefit. If they get a Supreme Court decision like next April or May that the president can't do this, that probably is more damaging to the president than a Supreme Court decision next week.
They've got some time for the court system to actually come to the rescue.
And maybe
here.
the closer to the election, I'm just talking from a political perspective, it's better for the Democrats.
Yeah. I mean, but I agree with you on that, too. I think that worrying about the politics now is so short-sighted. Do the right thing. Do the right thing, Democrats. The politics take care of themselves.
And we all know that politics change.
Right.
Who knows where we'll be 6 months, 8 months,
Well, then the Southern
9 months
District
from now.
may indict him for campaign finance violations. He's already an unindicted co-conspirator there. I believe we have some new sound of Chairman Nadler talking about what he got from Hope Hicks. Do we have that? Not yet. So here's what he said. I have a transcript. Chairman, here we go. Here's Chairman Nadler on the Hicks testimony.
I'm not going to comment.
I thought you just told someone that you were doing that.
No, what I told someone that we would take the doctrine of, hopefully misunderstanding. What I said was the White House is having this doctrine of absolute immunity, which will destroy in court. Doesn't mean she's a test case, necessarily.
So as of right now, you haven't decided if you're going to take Ms. Hicks to court.
Over that.
I don't know if you want to do any translation there. I mean, the transcript was a little more helpful. They're going to go to court over this question of immunity. Is that what you got?
Yeah, I think that's what he said, not clearly and not forcefully. I would have liked him to stop and go, we are taking them to court right now, and we're going to eat their lunch in court.
Not clearly and not forcefully has been the Democrats' issue throughout this process.
I agree. I agree. It's frustrating.
Joyce Vance, what is this? Immunity? Not a thing. What's everyone talking about? What does she want immunity from? I don't understand Congress to be querying her about anything that she hasn't already testified to Robert Mueller. What do they want immunity from?
Sure, and that's the point that Senator McCaskill makes, which is there's no executive privilege claim being asserted here because this stuff has been asked and answered and sent out into the public. So that's a failed argument. So now they've seized on this notion that she's immune from discussing absolutely anything that happened during her official tenure in the White House. And there's some sense that other administrations may have asserted this. And let me just put an end to that right here and debunk that myth, because what you have to have for a successful claim of immunity in this setting is you have to have a clean record. And here, where there's plenty of predicate that indicates that Hope is being asked to testify about criminal activity, there's no reason to apply immunity. There's no precedent for applying it. What happened in the Obama administration was an effort to look into someone with no predicate of criminal conduct. Here, 488 pages in the Mueller report say Hope Hicks has to answer questions for Congress.
And Frank Figliuzzi, one of the areas or time periods for which she did answer was the period before the transition, before the Trump presidency, which is obviously the Trump Tower meeting took place. All of the conduct that was under scrutiny in Volume 1 of the Mueller report was in place. And there have been some news reports from various news organizations that she would be asked about the hush money operation that the Southern District of New York investigated. What do those lines of inquiry say to you?
Well, they're pursuing criminality involving the president directly and her knowledge of it. So they are trying to lay a foundation for the possibility of high crimes and misdemeanors and the possibility of an impeachment. And I think Hope Hicks has to be very careful here because, you know, while she wouldn't apparently allegedly answer a simple question of, hey, is the Mueller report accurate with regard to what you said, right? She wouldn't answer that. She may be concerned about giving multiple divergent statements that could get her jammed up, and that would be an interesting scenario to be concerned about, self-incrimination, of course. But where I see this going is they're going to focus squarely on conduct she can talk about involving the president, crimes involving the president, her knowledge of them. Hope Hicks is not going away. You're going to see her called to testify in grand juries in the state of New York, in Manhattan, and she's going to be a player for the next few years, unfortunately or fortunately, on our TV screens.
Frank, let me just follow up on one thing that I remember her saying, I believe, in front of the House Intel Committee. She admitted to telling lies for Donald Trump. How does that square with all the exposure she faces in front of the grand juries you just described in those various jurisdictions?
Right. She's guaranteed to be called before a number of grand juries. She's going to have to tell the truth or risk criminal exposure herself. And that's where the power is. And so this whole discussion we've been having so far on the show, Nicole, about kind of the deflation of the Democratic Party, the House kind of being impotent right now or feeling that way. The power is shifting squarely to New York, to other jurisdictions, and prosecutions of the president that will get this material out. That's where I'm going to be focused. And as for whether or not the Democrats have the power and the intestinal fortitude to move forward, they're not doing it fast enough. They don't understand this is truly a crisis. We are in a battle for our three equal branches of government, and they're losing that battle right now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.